Love them or hate them, MMORPGs hold a special place in our heart, and often they are the reasons that we disappear online for weeks at a time. And over the last 10 years, there have been many new games to play, and updates to existing games that have forever held our interest. So now it's time to look back and see what is the best MMORPG of the past decade. Now, this isn't just all good news, because coming up we'll also rank the most hated MMORPG too, as well as which MMO expansion the critics and players were the most split over. MMORPGs are living games, and updates and expansions can bring joy or ire from gamers all around the world. Different updates will mean different things to certain players, so we'll actually be ranking the game, including the expansions, as a group, thus bringing in 10 different MMORPG experiences to this list. As always, be sure to leave your thoughts and your own rankings in the comments below. If you love MMORPGs, be sure to hit that subscribe button and allow me to welcome you to the workforce. Now, if you end up enjoying this video, please be sure to hit that like button and maybe share this out with your friends, as that really helps us out a lot. But without further ado, let's dive into our top 10 MMORPGs of the past decade. Starting off at number 10, featuring expansions like Forsaken with an average score of 72.5 and Shadowkeep with an average of 69, Destiny 2 makes number 10, pushing out DC Universe Online for that 10th spot. Now, looking at obviously the reviews for Destiny 2, the overall reception is generally positive from a critical perspective, but from a player's perspective, it's generally mixed. And that's because Destiny 2 doesn't know how to present itself. Most people come into this game not knowing it's an MMORPG, and the developers have recently finally started calling it that. That is why it's here in the number 10 spot. And because it's an MMORPG, it's going to bring in various mechanics that MMORPGs bring in, namely a lot of grinding. That's not necessarily going to be appealing, as the gunplay is very appealing. So typically people find it mixed. That's one of the best things about this game though. It now has a free to start edition, so players can come check it out, play it from time to time, and see if they like it and see how it ultimately feels for them. But that is our number 10, and now it's time to move on to number 9. We've got Star Wars: The Old Republic. Now, Star Wars comes at number 9 because it had all the makings of something different. And while it launched with the subscription model, it ultimately ended up having to go back to a free-to-play model like most MMORPGs have done over the last decade. Star Wars is here because it has an average score of 72.5, thus it's actually tied with Tera, so you guys know what's coming up here in a second. But with much lower user reviews, it falls to the 9th spot, while Tera ends up taking number 8. Overall, critically, this is a very positively reviewed game. However, users are ultimately very mixed when it comes to Star Wars. And Star Wars has also seen many expansions since it was published in 2011. In the number 8 spot, Tera takes it with an average score of 72.5. However, the user reviews are generally more positive, even though there are technically less reviews for them. Now, while I personally played this game for only a little bit, the action combat is its selling point, and players really wanting to break away from tab targeting, or essentially the Trinity model of MMORPGs, action MMORPGs do offer that break, even though Tera does have its very typical class system of tank and healers and more. However, Tera is always this weird game, and it's had multiple iterations across different systems, even coming to console over the course of the last 10 years. Ultimately, I find myself not necessarily diving into it, thus I personally don't rank Tera very high. Now, number 7 is a heartbreaker. I really enjoyed Waltz Star, and I thought the combat and the humor were spot on, but like most MMORPGs, it personally failed to hook me and also convince me that there was a future worth investing in. And sadly, it is also no longer around today. But at its launch back in 2014, it came out strong with an average score of 78.5. Personally, I really enjoyed its combat and the art style that the game presented. I tried to return this game a few months before it was shut down, but the worlds being so empty, it was clear that the game was done. Yet, despite its death, it had its charm and it will be missed. Overall, critical reviews are positive with only really one negative one. User reviews are also generally positive with a few mixed and a few negative. So ultimately, it really failed to capture the market based off of what the developers were trying to do here in this decade. It didn't really learn the lessons, and ultimately, I think really kind of its biggest downside is it wasn't based off of a previously existing franchise. Anyway, number 6 is Conan Rise of the Godslayer. Age of Conan actually makes this list because its expansion Rise of the Godslayer released in 2010 and with an average score of 79.5. The reviews are generally positive from a critical perspective. User reviews are completely mixed. 6 liked it, 4 didn't. Not a lot of reviews, and that can tell you why you really don't hear about Age of Conan anymore. Yet, it is an era of bygones past, and it was a very beautiful game when it launched. Moving on to number 5, this might probably be our most controversial ranking, but it's World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft actually makes the number 5 spot, and it isn't lower on the list. Legion with an average score of 80.5 is a major reason why WoW is listed in the number 5 slot and not actually lower on the list. Now, if you look at expansions like Cataclysm, Draenor, BFA, Pandaria, they all are actually reviewed critically well. However, they were panned with user scores. Ultimately, Cataclysm launched with rave reviews and really, really poor user reviews. Probably not at the time, but in hindsight, a lot of people really look at Cataclysm as kind of a real turning point in its descent, where people end up looking at Lich King and previous expansions that happened prior to this decade more favorably. Now, Cataclysm didn't make the most hated MMORPG in the last decade, but it came very close with a delta score of -34. Like when we take the average critical score and the average user score and see how different critics and users feel about it. Yet, WoW persists on, and obviously into the next decade, as it now is celebrating 15 years of changing the landscape and also creating a genre and a type of MMORPG that many others tried to copy, aka Wildstar and other ones that are no longer with us. Coming in at number 4 is Path of Exile with an average score of 83.5, and it's also paired with an overwhelmingly positive community score. Grinding Gear Games has created something special with Path of Exile, and it's one of those pile of shame games that I have yet to make time for. But in doing research for this video itself, I'm pretty convinced by reading the reviews and more that this game is something that I need to be checking out in 2020. Overall, positive reviews critically, and very few negative reviews from the user base. So let me know what you think about Path of Exile, and I'll be sure to check it out coming up soon. As we move into the top 3 MMORPGs of the last decade, I'm so excited because all 3 I actually love very deeply. Now, Elder Scrolls Online takes the number 3 spot with an average score of 82.5, and this is coming off the Tamriel Unlimited Edition. This is also in response to obviously its poor reception at launch. So a lot of these things in the top 3 are somewhat Cinderella stories for the most part. Plus, with expansions like Somerset, Morrowind, and elsewhere all getting more than their fair share of favorable scores, I find myself personally conflicted about ESO. Having primarily played this game on console, I find that the updates to the game itself have been relatively nice. And playing with my brother and our friends is always a treat, but without that pool, I struggle to find time to log in and play. Yet when I do, I always have a blast, and ESO continues to release solid content for this game, and this is nice considering some of the other games that Bethesda is currently working on. ESO has also had its own issues obviously getting off the ground, but with each year, players continue to recommend that I return or join them for some good old-fashioned fun. Now, number 2 is Guild Wars 2. Now, making the top 3 of the list due to its average review of 85.5, and with 2 expansions under its wing, Path of Fire and Heart of Thorns, this game keeps on keeping on. My only issue with this game is the lack of native controller support, and while I have played the game with some add-ons to actually use a controller, I find that I still wish that we would see Guild Wars 2 on other platforms. Now, I return to this game for a few months each year and make some progress with the story and more, but it's one of the strengths and weaknesses of its own business model. I don't feel compelled to play as much as possible, but I also love this game and how it actually positively impacted MMORPGs over the last decade. And with live events that tell stories while you play through the zones, personally I find this to be my 3rd favorite MMORPG on the market today, behind Destiny and our number 1 slot, which should be no surprise to subscribers of this channel, Final Fantasy XIV. Now, it should be little to no surprise, like I said, that this is on the top of the list, but it's not because I'm someone who's played this game for so long, or I'm basically professed Final Fantasy fanboy. Final Fantasy XIV is here because of Shadowbringers. This pushes at the top with the highest average score of a 90. It also has Stormblood, Heavensward, and ARR pushing it up there as well, with really favorable reviews for each of expansions and getting better with each one. Beyond that though, it's also a Cinderella story and one that other companies could and should study when it comes to the games that are built to last. Final Fantasy XIV started off as one of the most hated games by critics and players back in 2010, and in 2019 it's one of the highest rated games released this year, even outside the MMORPG space. So now you should have a good idea of the most horrible MMORPGs that were also released this decade, and those are Final Fantasy XIV, WoW, and ESO. All three have had their ups and downs, but the king of the bad would actually have to be WoW BFA with an average user score of 3.0, far lower than any of that of Final Fantasy XIV and ESO. Yet each one of those have had their issues as well. So it shows that even if something bad happens, with the right development team behind the game and the right leadership in place, anything is possible. So how did we do? What do you think of our top 10 MMORPGs for the decade? Were there any games that we missed, and how would you rank these MMORPGs yourself? Feel free to sound off in the comments below or join us over on our Discord server. Link is in the description if you want to have that conversation as well. Now, I do want to take this time to thank all of our Patreons, YouTube members, and Twitch subscribers for helping us make content like this possible. Now, over here on YouTube, we do have a membership button, and if you're interested in it, you can hit that join button for just $1 a month, and you can help get yourself some emotes and more, as well as support independent content like this. But beyond the support the community gives us here, you being here and watching this video is more than enough. So thank you for your time, and I hope that you had fun. If you did, we'd love to hear from you, and we hope that we see you in our next video. But for Work to Game, my name is Brian, and I hope that you have an amazing life. Peace and love. Take care.